Hi, my name is Braven and I'm a sculptor. I like to sculpt in clay and then cast in concrete. Today I'm going to be making this one. This is a rubber mold that I took off of a clay sculpture of a sour lemon face. When you look at the mold, you can kind of get an idea of what the sculpture is going to look like. And we're about to see how I make the concrete casts of these. First, I take the rubber mold and just clean it off. Then I take a little vegetable shortening and just paint it around on the inside so that when the concrete solidifies inside the mold, it'll be a little bit easier to take out. And on any given day, it doesn't make much difference. But over time, after say 100 casts, it really does reduce wear and tear on the mold. Silicone rubber is a pretty tough material, but once it tears, it tears. This is going to be a wall hanging, so I embed a copper wire into the concrete so that it can hang flush against the wall using any hook or nail. For those who know about wire, this is copper magnet wire, 14 gauge, which is just about sturdy enough. I like to use copper because it will never rust. Now I'm about to mix up the concrete. I just have a galvanized metal bucket there. Today I'm using Rapid Set brand all-purpose construction concrete. It's really not a concrete, technically it's a mortar because it doesn't have gravel in it. The only aggregate in this cement is sand, which makes it fine enough to cast relatively fine details on a sculpture. I'm not using a respirator for this part of the work because it doesn't create that much dust, but I do put a fan next to, just an ordinary room fan next to my bucket so that the dust that comes up won't go straight into my lungs. I mix up the concrete to something like a wet milkshake consistency. Not too soupy. A little thicker than pea soup, I'd say. Too much water and the concrete gets weak. Next, I like to create fluid flow over the surface of the inside surface of the mold to eliminate bubbles. Every little bubble that forms between the concrete body and the inner surface of the mold is going to create a little pit or a pinhole that I'll have to fix later. So the more I can reduce any of those bubbles, the better. And I do it not so much by vibrating the concrete, but by shaking it and making it flow across the surface of the mold. I found that's the best way to keep the concrete and the aggregate mixed. If you just do fine shaking or vibrating without moving the concrete body around, the heavier quartz sand inside the concrete will settle to the bottom. And in this case, it'll be the high points of the sculpture, the nose and the brows will get sort of a grainy, weak concrete in them. But if you keep it flowing like this, it'll keep the concrete mixed and uniform. As the concrete solidifies, going from a milkshake consistency to something more like soft ice cream, I just use a chip brush to modulate the thickness of the sculpture. And what I'm aiming for is something like what I call dinner plate thickness, which is pretty self-explanatory. The finished concrete body is going to be something like the strength of stoneware ceramics. So I really do make an analogy with dinnerware, and I like to make it. The simplest thing would be to cast this sculpture solid, but then it would weigh about 15 pounds and just have a lot of wasted material in it and just be too clunky. So I like to make it, like I said, about like a dinner plate, heavy enough so that you can feel the quality of it and that it feels like stone, but light enough that it has an elegant thinness to it, and that I can carry about 100 of these to a farmer's market or a craft market and hang them up in a day and sell some of them, and that people who are shopping can easily carry them around. So I think this will be about a little under 2 pounds when it's finished. That's what I'm aiming for. Here I'm making just some little plinths inside the back of the sculpture to secure the hanging wire. I'm using a silicone rubber mold, by the way, which I make my own molds off of my own sculptures, and in other videos I'll show you how to make the silicone rubber molds. Now you can see that the concrete has now solidified enough that the wire can stand up on its own. But it's interesting, I'm making a big mistake right here, which I don't realize until you see when I spot it. I've just made a huge mistake with this casting. It's hard to tell what it is because we're looking at the back of the sculpture, but it turns out it's upside down. I put the wire in the bottom of the sculpture. If you hung this on the wall, my lemon face sculpture would be upside down. So I have to take the wire out, get rid of those little mountains of reinforced concrete, turn it right side up. Yeah, I'm pointing at a little notch that I make at the top of my molds because of this mistake. I've made it several times before, and even after more than a decade of casting this sculpture, I still make that mistake once in a while. About once a year I'll do this. But it's easily fixable. I'm just repeating the same process of inserting the wire that I did a minute ago, but now it's in the correct position. This is fairly rapid setting concrete. If you let it sit for 5 to 7 minutes, it could solidify enough to be unworkable depending on the temperature of the air and water. But if you keep mixing it every couple of minutes, you can keep it workable for an hour or more. So working time, even with very rapid setting concrete, is really no problem if you keep attentive to it. And you'll notice that the concrete that I mixed up in that bucket on the right hand side of the screen is getting to be about as hard as clay, pottery clay. So I'd better mix it up pretty soon, or else it's going to stick to the inside of the bucket and make a mess. Just keeping all the edges clean. That's a dull knife, by the way. I don't use it to cut. I use it something more like a spatula. Now, if I had let this concrete go more than 3 or 4 more minutes, it would be too solid to work. But just by keeping it mixed, adding a little water when needed, you can keep it workable and use it kind of like clay. I'm looking at that wire to make sure it's at the right angle and protruding just enough so that this sculpture will be able to hang perfectly flush against the wall when you use a small hook or a nail. And now I'm taking some of the leftover concrete and just making a nice little reinforcing ridge along the back of the sculpture. You don't want to have a sharp edge on the back of the sculpture, and making a nice ridge like this just gives it a quality look and also reinforces the sculpture to make it strong enough to last decades. This particular concrete is very high grade stuff, and it develops, after a few days, it develops almost 6,000 pounds of square inch of compressive strength, which is far more than you need for a sculpture like this. 800 psi or even 2,000 are just plenty. So this will be a little bit stronger than stoneware, like fired ceramic dinnerware. But it'll still, if you smash it, I mean, if you drop it on concrete, it'll still crack and chip. But it's just a very good, strong material. And I'm just smoothing off the back. I like to have the back of the sculptures look very smooth and high quality. And also, I use the back of a spoon just to smooth off the back of the sculpture so that I will have a good writing surface, so that later on when I sign it with a pencil, it will be easier to sign and number and date. The more smoothing I do now, the less sanding and grinding I'll have to do later. That's why I'm being particularly careful to get a real smooth surface on the back. With a little bit of concrete left over, I'm going to make a refrigerator magnet using this mold of a bunch of grapes. And I'll just take the leftover concrete and dab it in there. Make sure the bubbles are all pushed out. And this is an example of what it's going to look like when it comes out of the mold. Just by shaking it and agitating it, the relatively stiff concrete will re-liquefy and settle into the mold. See how it will re-liquefy when I shake it. And find a level to make a smooth back that I can glue a magnet to and make it into a little refrigerator magnet. People like them at the craft markets. Now, before all this concrete solidifies, I've got to wash my tools because you do not want them to get encrusted with rock hard concrete. So just spraying them with water is good enough. Just give them a good scrubbing. To ensure that the concrete cures properly, I like to keep it moist overnight. So I just cover it with a plastic bag and then weight that very gently with some damp rags. And this will just ensure the concrete really solidifies perfectly. The next day, it's time to take the sculpture out of the mold. It's a little bit of a moment of truth. We'll see how good this cast was. I'm pretty confident about it. I really did get all the bubbles out, so there shouldn't be too many pinholes in the front. And it looks very good. Do a little stress testing. Make sure it's as strong as dinnerware, say. Nice and thin. Thin, but not eggshell thin. And this little refrigerator magnet will pop right out. Now that the concrete is rock hard, it's time to take tile rasps and sandpaper and just start smoothing off the back and all of the rough edges. This is the least fun part of the work, but it's got to be done. It's also very dusty, so I wear a respirator and protective glasses. And I turn on my fan. I turn on that room fan on the right-hand side of the screen on high, just to blow all the dust away. This tool that I'm using that looks like a pen is actually a very handy carbide point. It's the size of, and mechanically I think the mechanism is a mechanical pencil, mechanism, but instead of a pencil lead, it has a sharp carbide steel point in it, and it's very good for clearing out little details of the concrete sculpture. I've had it for more than 10 years and it just never dulls. As you can see, I've cast 4 lemons here, and I'm going to be working on them all at once. It's a pretty popular item, and it sells pretty well when I put it out on display at my farmer's market and craft market displays. So I've always got to have 3 or 4 of them on hand. It also sells at my Etsy shop. Link in the description, by the way. After preparing the sculptures for painting by sanding them, I sign the backs using a pencil. I've used indelible ink, and I find that even the best indelible ink will fade after a few years if it's out in the weather. But graphite, a pencil, will never fade. And I'm spraying this with Rust-Oleum polyurethane clear spray lacquer, matte, never glossy. And I find that as long as I spray this onto the pencil signature on the back, it will just last forever. So this is really the best way to weatherproof something. I've tried all kinds of nautical, high-grade, extremely expensive polyurethane sprays and varathane lacquers and varnishes, and I found just plain old Rust-Oleum or Krylon spray lacquer. It is just as good as anything, and it lasts forever. It also provides a little bit of UV protection for the paint that I'm going to color these with. So I'll start with 1 layer of spray lacquer on the raw concrete because it's so porous, it's difficult to paint in the way that I want to. So to create a good painting surface, and also just to really increase the weatherproof quality of these, I give them an initial layer of spray lacquer. Then I start the painting process, and at each step of the painting process I add another layer of lacquer. Now I'm painting some black calligraphy ink, just India ink. Sometimes I use sepia or really dark violet, but here it's just black India ink onto the dried lacquer surface. Then I wipe it off, and what this does is it creates a nice antiqued contrast layer of color that will look very good underneath the translucent watercolors that I'm going to use on top of it. So this is always the first step I take before adding color. Once that's dry, I sometimes lacquer over it again, and sometimes I don't. But in this case I did, because I'm using a very light yellow that I don't want it to pick up any of that black contrast layer. And I'm just dabbing this. It's a combination of colors that I've created that's just a good a translucent lemon yellow, using a combination of watercolors and acrylics that I've just developed through trial and error. And I paint it on, and dab it. During the last 5 minutes of drying, I dab it with the paintbrush, just tap it to remove all of the brush strokes, because I just don't want to have brush strokes on it. Now the paint is dry, but it's not weatherproof. It looks good, but it needs to be weatherproofed with another couple of layers of clear, flat lacquer. One way to give a really good quality lacquer finish is to make many light layers and let each one dry before you put on the next. The other way is just to spray an obscene amount of lacquer onto your sculpture and then make sure it doesn't drip by doing this in front of a fan. It gives you a very good, thick, permanent layer of lacquer in a shorter time, but you've got to be really careful. You've got to make it sort of dance in front of the fan so that it doesn't drip, because drips can look really ugly. But if you do it right, you can save a lot of time and make a very thick layer of strong lacquer all in one go. Now that I've done that with all 4 sculptures, they have a very good protective layer of dried, hard polyurethane, durable polyurethane lacquer that's going to protect them for a century. It'll also block UV light from getting in and fading the yellow too much. But I tell customers anything will fade in direct sunlight. So if you hang these out in direct sunlight for a couple of years, they're going to fade. But I myself keep selling my faded ones because they look good. They fade to kind of a pastel color, but they don't crack or peel. That's what I like about polyurethane. Now, after the polyurethane is thoroughly cured, after 2 days or so, I take some Min wax or Johnson wax paste wax. It's whatever woodworkers use to wax or furniture wax, whatever woodworkers use to make their creations look really good. That's what I dab onto the finished sculpture, because buffing wax just gives a very nice polish to these sculptures that doesn't look too shiny or plasticky, but gives it a very organic, just a beautiful glow. And I've sold things to places everywhere from Russia to New Zealand to Peru and South Africa and France. There it goes. Little bubble wrap and some cardboard just to reinforce it and make sure it doesn't break in during all the stresses of shipment. Off you go.